Another episode of Getting Aligned. Mark Meir here with our guest, John Dieffenbach, who's joined us to talk about his philosophy in negotiation. So, John, turning it over to you. How'd you get into the space? You're really popular in the space now, especially on LinkedIn, writing a book as well. But you have a really illustrious and rich career. So how'd you get into this?
Uh, a lot of circumstance and decisions that I didn't know where they were going to take me. So I actually started out my professional life as a newspaper reporter. And I started covering the courts and thought that what the litigators were doing was much more interesting than writing about it. So I said, I want to be a litigator. I have a bit of a performance gene in me. And I thought that would be great to be up in front of a bunch of people and talking about this stuff. And so I went to law school to be a litigator, and then I didn't become a litigator. I took a job with IBM. I walked in the door, and basically they handed me a contract and said, go negotiate this. And it was so much fun. I thought, wow, this is going to be great. And so I started with there doing large technology services deals, and then continued that at Accenture and now at EY. So that's all I've been doing is negotiating deals first from the legal side, and then moving into sales and pure negotiation after that.
Love that. What's really great about your background, too, is obviously there's a lot of people that talk about personal negotiations or fast-paced transactional negotiations. There's a lot of research, but it typically spends a lot of time in transactional, one-to-one, price-focused deals. You have such a rich background now in enterprise-size negotiations, lots of different stakeholders, tons of terms, much more interdependency and trust. So
Right.
when it comes to negotiation, how would you define it, given all of your different experiences?
I've always been kind of a reductionist that when I look at something, I say, let's get down to the core of this thing so we can figure out what it is and we can build on it. And if you think about what is the most central thing you need to manage in a negotiation to be successful, it's words. It really comes down to words. Among three leaders, Mahatma Gandhi, Martin Luther King, Nelson Mandela, changed their world, arguably changed the world at the time. Which of those three people had the largest army?
It's a good question. None.
It's a trick question,
Yeah.
right? It's a trick question. Yeah, they did it with their words. It was all words. And at the end of the day, in terms of how we are going to change the mind of another person, how they're thinking, what their currently perceived choices, it's all going to be about the words that we choose so that they start to think about the situation differently, which is obviously what they did. But that element of influence, the importance of influence and using the right words, I think gets lost on folks when they think about negotiation, because certainly in popular media, it's represented as a game, and things like hostage negotiations in the movies and everything else, it's very sexy and cool and tense looking. And business negotiations are much more mundane than all of that. It's a lot of preparation. It's a lot of thought. But for me, it's always about who am I going to be talking to? And what do they need to accomplish? What do they need to be successful here? And how do we get them there? So when people say, oh, when does a negotiation start? For me, it starts as soon as I hear the name of the company and potentially the name of the other person and find out what's their background. And what can I do to start to build an environment where we're going to build affiliation with one another and build trust and be able to get a deal done. Because as you described in this enterprise negotiations, it's a multi-headed animal that you're working with, all different personalities, all different interests that they have. And you have to assess each one of those, and you divide it into two groups. There's those who must say yes. There's those who can say no. And you need to know who those two groups are and what's driving them. And I had a deal years ago where we were very close to closing, and we had put all of the people we were working with on the client side up on a whiteboard. And we were talking about, have we met their interests? Are we good here? We're good here. And somebody came in and said, what about the chief risk officer? And we said, we did what I call a Scooby-Doo moment. We went, Roar? We had a Scooby-Doo moment. Who is the chief risk officer? Oh, they just hired her 2 weeks ago. Oh, well, what's the deal with her? She doesn't like outsourcing services to the Philippines. Our deal was outsourcing services to the Philippines.
No.
So Now, all of a sudden, we go into, okay, how do we solve for this now? Because when this deal lands, chief risk officer lands on her desk, she's going to have a lot of questions. So immediately it was, we've got to figure out how to either make her a supporter or at least make it neutral, that she's not, but if she's a no, the people who can say no can wreck everything for you. And so that was a big surprise. So that, goes to the point around the preparation. In an enterprise negotiation where you've got a lot of personalities, you got to get your power map out. You got to figure out who everybody is, what do they want, how do they fit in. And the thing that I'm always looking for is what I call the voice of the deal. Who on the client side is the person who cares most about this negotiation being successful, and then putting somebody alongside them, put a body on that person so that we're creating a relationship there. That becomes your escalation table. That becomes the people who care about it, that if you're at what I call table one, the transaction table, if you run into problems, among the lawyers and the negotiators and everybody else down here, you have people who want this deal and are talking to each other on a business level, not on a transactional level, relationship level. And you can escalate up to them and say, what do we do about this? How do we solve for this problem? Oh, Mark, you and I know this deal's going on for the next 5 years. We can work this out somehow, right? And we will work it out. So that's the importance of getting all of those people in the enterprise identified, which is why I always use the phrase, you have to know how to run the room. Because in the early days, I would walk into a conference room and there'd be 20 people in there, 10 on my side, 10 on their side. And my job as a negotiator was, how do I get these 19 people to get aligned on a shared goal that's going to make both parties successful over the next 6 months?
That's great. And I really appreciate what you said. First off, running the room, stay tuned at some point this year.
That's right.
But also, you have these like kitschy phrases of, negotiation is 90% preparation. I feel like that underappreciates how important communication is.
Mm-hmm.
We as a firm over-index on the communication phase. We talk about 4 phases of a deal, right? You have the preparation phase, largely internal alignment, understanding your objectives, understanding kind of gets gives, thinking about the deal from your perspective, thinking about the deal from their perspective. But the communication phase is the second phase we talk about, where you're really bringing the deal to life. You're communicating with your counterparty, you're setting clear expectations, positioning your needs, demonstrating some flexibility, finding where you're complementary, understanding where you're in conflict. The communication phase, we feel, is where you're either going to build yourself a castle,
Yeah,
or dig yourself a giant hole you can't get out of before you can move to phase 3 and phase 4, which is delivering clear and concise proposals, and then aligning on final deal terms, bridging all the stakeholders together, getting the agreement signed and moving on. So
right.
What are some of your top tips when it comes to communicating specifically? So outside of the kind of classic, if you do this for me, I'll do that for you, before we even get to the proposals, what are some of your tips or philosophies on how to communicate effectively?
A lot of good communication comes from representing yourself as somebody who will listen and who can be talked to. Because when the parties first get together, there's always this sort of feeling of risk and danger around, I don't know what's going to happen here. And I've done this after 33 years now. I've done this enough where when I go into the room or get on video, I've kind of done my homework, so I know what's going on, what the issues are, what people are trying to accomplish. And now I'm going to focus on communication. And how do I deliver this? How do I open? How do I start? So everybody has a different way of doing it. I happen to like to come in big, a big hello, a smile, a joke. I find humor is tremendously valuable if it's something that you're able to do. I mean, I actually had an aspiration of being a stand-up comedian at one time.
It's never too late.
It's never too late. So I do like humor, and I had one negotiation. When things get hard, I look for an opportunity to bust it up with a joke if I can. So we had a negotiation for a deal that was about $50 million, and the lawyer on the other side was experienced, but not really experienced. So she set the bar for the limitation of liability. She dropped the anchor, but she dropped the anchor way out here. It was like in an incredible, unbelievable location. So we got on, and it was on video. So I'm just staring at my laptop, Everybody's staring at their laptops. We're all on video screen. And she said, and we think for this deal, the limitation liability should be $250 million. So 5 times the value of the deal. And I thought, all right, I'm going to have some fun here. And I said, so just so I understand, you're saying the limitation of liability should be $250 million. And I stuck my face into the screen just like that to make it big wherever they were. And everybody laughed. Everybody started laughing about it. And it was, I was being absurd, obviously. But more importantly, I was sending a message to her that your position is literally laughable, because I made a joke about it and everybody laughed. So it was a softer way of saying no, instead of saying, are you out of your mind 5 times? And carrying on like that. It was sort of like saying, no, this is really kind of silly. And she came back the next day and said, we think it's fair to be at $100 million. So it was 2 times the value of it, which is a more credible anchor to drop. So humor helps that way. But it's also staying attuned to the mood of what's happening and how others are communicating, because you can start to sense something is going wrong and like tensions are rising. Once emotion gets introduced into a negotiation, you got a problem, because emotion will override logic. So the 3 primary categories in a negotiation that you need to prepare for are the substance, the process, and the emotion. Now, everybody prepares for the substance. What's the deal about? What are we doing? What's it going to cost, et cetera, et cetera. Some people prepare for the process, but the process, if you're not prepared for it, bad process will destroy good substance. If you send a bad SOW, if you don't organize your meetings well, if you're not following up, to your point about communication, send paper, send people. After I send a contract, I have a phone call. I don't want to get a red line back from a client unless we've had a conversation about what I sent them. So you send paper, you send people, you communicate. Okay, now that you understand where I'm coming from, now you can come back to me. That's a process issue. And then emotion. Emotion is really where the deal gets done. Because if you think about, again, going back to fundamentals, how do deals get done? They get done by decisions made by human beings on the basis of emotion, on the basis of how they feel. And nobody ever signs up with a supplier because they are the best supplier. They sign up with the supplier who's least likely to screw up. So this is all about risk avoidance. And so the more that I can communicate about who I am, what I've done, and what I can accomplish, and push down those risk flags for the client, I can then start to build that trust that I need, because trust closes deals. You're never going to get somebody to sign a deal because they have to. They are signing because they trust this is the best thing for them. This is the best thing that we could possibly do. It's better than my BATNA, right? Your deal always has to be better than their BATNA, or else they're going to go to their BATNA. So that's where the trust piece comes from.
Yeah. And I love that. Our philosophies are very much aligned, pun intended. You talk about substance, process, and emotions. We talk about relationships, processes, and goals, more or less the exact same thing. That's kind of our strategic framework. We also break down different types of negotiation. I think this would be really helpful for the audience too, is kind of how you think about different types of circumstances. Here at Align, we talk about breaking down a negotiation across a few different factors. You have the number of terms you're agreeing to. You have the number of alternatives. So BATNA's general alternatives in the marketplace for you and them. And then how long are we effectively working together here? How long is this contract going to be in place for? Those are the 3 kind of primary why are we here today. But the big underlying piece is, what type of precedent has been set? What type of relationship do we have based on all the deals we've done, past, present, and could be into the future? So you take all 4 of these factors and then we break it down into 4 different categories. So very few amount of terms, a lot of alternatives, short-term transactional deals. You're going to skew towards bargaining. I don't need a relationship when we're bargaining. It doesn't really matter. I can be irrational. I can not be credible because I can burn and turn here because we're only dealing a couple different terms. I got a lot of alternatives. When some of those start ratcheting up, more terms we're negotiating over, maybe a balance of a little quantitative, a little qualitative. Maybe there's fewer alternatives in the marketplace. Maybe we're signing a reoccurring deal or a couple small 2 to 3 year contract, and I have a relationship that is at least professional. I'll dive more into trading, kind of balanced approach. I still want to tilt the scales in my favor, right? But my credibility matters a lot more, and we feel most B2B settings end up in this nice trading dynamic. Then as you continue to ratchet up all these different complexities, fewer alternatives, better relationship, then you unlock the more collaborative side of a deal, which is creating and or partnering when we're much more interdependent. So that's kind of how we define 4 different categories of commercial, professional, personal negotiations. How would you define different types of negotiation from your perspective?
So when I think about negotiations generally, all negotiations are a subset of influence. Influence is the overarching concept, because all negotiation is about sometimes literally changing the no in somebody's head to a yes. And you've got to use words and try to influence to that outcome. But there are all different types that I certainly would not play in like union negotiations, in international diplomacy. Those areas, they're a completely different kind of beast. And so anybody who is a business negotiator, you can't really hostage negotiations, different kind of beast. So the negotiations that I'm talking about are those that people do every day. Like going through a stop sign is a negotiation. It has some rules to it, transactional efficiency, off we go. Getting on an elevator, the same. But then like buying a car is much more competitive, your commodity type of a purchase, very low relationship. I'm not going to see these people again. And I love buying cars because it is the one time where I get to be the worst person in the world as a negotiator, just to kind of see, because as you said, you've got many alternatives. When you're buying a car, it's all BATNA. I can go to another dealership, I can get a different kind of car, et cetera. So you can really use that as a lab and kind of see how people behave and the sorts of things that they do. And then you have the relationship negotiations with family and community and so on, which are more relationship, less substance. And then up here at the top is the collaborative negotiations, which, as you were describing, there's a lot more trading. It's a lot more about relationship. Because building the relationship, as I said, that trust is so important. If you're not building that relationship, you're not really building a path to success for your negotiation, because somebody's going to get a better relationship. So it's a function of sales as well, which is, again, another subset of influence on par with negotiations. But it's the same thing. You've got to have those relationships to be able to build trust. And so part of this game, a huge part of this game, to your point about communications, is how do you build relationships with people? What do you do? What are the steps to get there? How do I build affiliation? How do I build trust? And so that is something that I am always looking for. Where could I get an in here with somebody? Because I've just walked in, I'm meeting this person for the first time, and at some point I want to get a strong relationship with them. And so I had this in a deal many years ago where we were down in North Carolina, and the primary executive, the voice of the deal, when I first started talking to him, he had a New York accent. And he was a very difficult guy. He was the chief operating officer of the company. He had committed this deal was going to get done in 30 days. Everybody on my team was afraid of him because he was very brusque, but he was a New Yorker. So he was, my kind of guy. So at one point I said to him, "Hey, Bob," I said, that's not a North Carolina accent that you've got there. Where are you from? And he said, "Oh, no, I'm from the Bronx." Oh. I said, "Oh, what part of the Bronx?" He said, "Castle Hill." "Oh, St. Raymond's Parish?" "Yeah, I went to St. Raymond's High School." "Oh, did you know so-and-so and so-and-so?" "Oh, yeah, they play bet." So that's the thing I've come to call New York Catholic High School Mafia. Because if you went like I did, if you went to a Catholic high school in New York, you can define where somebody may have gone to high school based on where they live. Oh, Staten Island, oh, you went to Farrell. Oh, you went to Xavier. And you can just call these names out and boom, you can build affiliation like that. Now, if I'm not in the New York area and not dealing with people, you have to find other things to do. So a good friend of mine, he had a deal in Japan. He's a big guy. Raised in the Western United States, former military guy, kind of a big howdy, how you doing kind of guy. So he said, John, I went out and I met with this executive, and physically we couldn't have been any more different. He's big. The guy was not that big. But we met, we talked. I thought, my gosh, what am I going to do here? I walked into his office and I saw roses. He had roses in a vase, and he had pictures of roses. And we sat down, we started talking. I said, excuse me, I said, are those Queen Elizabeth roses? And he said, yes, they are. He said, you know roses? And my friend said, yeah, I'm a Rosarian. He said, oh, wow. And things took off from there. But I said to him, I never even knew there was such a thing as a Rosarian. But he just lucked out. But the thing is, he had his radar on, looking, where am I going to find that moment, that connection, that I can build affiliation? How am I going to communicate that? I can't do it ham-handed. I have to find a way to sneak it in there, that it's genuine, that I'm really interested in them. And then now I've got something. Now, is that enough to close the deal? No, but it's a thread. And it's a thread that you can continue to pull and pull and pull and weave, and you'll actually start to create that fabric of trust over time if you keep at it.
And that's one big thing when we talk about how do people feel about negotiation. We've asked this question to like 10,000 plus people at this point, and the overwhelming majority of people feel negative emotions about negotiation. I've heard impending doom a few weeks ago, necessary evil, I don't like it, secretive, manipulative. Probably a lot of it's related to kind of what we see in the marketplace, from your hostage negotiator talking about commercial negotiation, diplomacy, etc. All of these things that aren't what we do, that have stakes other than life or death. So people are naturally not open to negotiating, so they're naturally more secretive. But if we want to find this overlap, we have to be being open to being persuaded is persuasive. So sharing your interests and sharing a little bit more about you shows that I am a person. I'm not here to manipulate you. And I had a quick story about a client we onboarded last year where we're working with their HR person, and she goes, okay, I need to negotiate this deal with you, but you're the company that I'm hiring to help us negotiate. I don't know what to do in this situation. Now, we've done a lot of relationship building before that point. They're based in Wisconsin. I'm a massive Packers fan, so we were related on the Packers. We broke down a lot of barriers, and I said, you know what? I'm the best person in the world for you to negotiate with, because I will tell you exactly what I'm open to entertaining, what I'm not open to entertaining, and here are all the paths in which we can take to get the deal done quickly and efficiently. And we were done 15, 20 minutes on the call. We hammered out the final details, and we got it over the line. So finding all these different branches of interest are super important. But how do you break down someone's barriers when 80-85% of the people we ask are fearful of negotiation? How do you break down some of those barriers?
It's de-escalating what a negotiation is. The way that I always handle it, and which is why I'm not afraid of it and why I enjoy it, is because a negotiation is a conversation between two parties to find common ground to try to establish value for each other. The most important part of that sentence is it's a conversation. Once you frame it that you're just going to have a conversation, then I look forward to it, because I like to talk to people. I like to learn about them, but what's going on, where are you from, all that sort of stuff. So I like conversations. The reason why people are afraid of it is the same reason people are afraid of public speaking and other things where they have to get up in front of people. It's embarrassment. People do not want to be embarrassed. It is an incredibly strong driving factor in our behavior. And so the reason why people are afraid of negotiation is they think they're going to do it wrong, and they will be embarrassed. And especially if you're talking about large corporate negotiations, they're going to look foolish in front of other people. Years ago, I did a negotiation training class in Japan. And I don't speak Japanese. So I was doing it in English, and I was told that everybody in the room spoke English. So I let them do the negotiation exercises in Japanese. That would be easy for them. But when we came back and asked for feedback, I got dead silence. And I'd throw out a question, dead silence. This is like 24 people in the room, and everybody's just staring at me. Now, my co-presenter did speak Japanese. And he said something in Japanese, and then people responded. Nobody wanted to respond in English because they were not comfortable enough with their English to speak in front of their peers, and they didn't want to be embarrassed. So that whole class had to be done in Japanese. We could not do, I could present in English, but then any feedback or anything we talked about afterward, it always had to be done in Japanese. And that's that fear of embarrassment. I mean, it was an incredibly awkward feeling that 24 people, and I kind of like awkward situations. I like to see how is this going to go. I had a negotiation where we were down to one final issue, and the procurement lead and I were sitting at one end of the table, and my sales guy was at the other end of the table. And he said, so we've got this one final issue we've got to work through. And I said, yes. I said, and you see, this was in Australia. He said, I said, you said you were going to go away and have a think on it. And he said, well, I did go away and have a think on it. And I came back and thought that you should have a think on it. So basically he wants me to bid against myself. And I said, well, I told you, I shared with you where we could go with this, and that really is the best we could do. And he said, well, then I don't know what we're going to do. And he stopped talking. And I sat there and thought, okay, it's going to be the silence tactic here. This is going to be fun. Let's see how this goes. So I had to distract myself because I was going to laugh because I thought it was funny that he was doing this. So I started like meditating in my head, just kind of looking ahead and meditating and thinking. And out of the corner of my eye, I see the sales guy, and he's looking at me saying, say something. And I'm looking at him like, don't you dare talk. Don't you dare talk. We're going to ride this one out. And it might have been 15 seconds, but it felt like 5 minutes. And finally he said, okay, let's just get this done. We'll agree to, what you guys have proposed. And that was it. But it was like I was enjoying that awkward moment. It's like I'm experiencing the silence tactic. This is awesome.
It's fun to see some of those tactics too. I remember I got you see good cop, bad cop, right?
Yeah.
All the time. I got pulled into a meeting room one time and just got berated, just yelled at. It was myself, a colleague, and then the head of HR, just like berated on something that we were doing it within a deal. She finished up everything she was doing. I said, are you done? She goes, yes. Walked out of the room, wanted to get something off of her chest. Had a conversation with the head of HR. We squashed the deal parameters we were trying to figure out. But there was also, sometimes people just want to get things off their chest. They want to vent. They want to yell a little bit. And in our opinion, conflict is so ingrained in negotiation because without any inherent level of conflict or disagreement, there's really no reason for you to negotiate necessarily.
Right. You must agree on everything because there's no conflict here.
Exactly. We just like put a bunch of stuff on your website and there'd be drop downs and you'd be done. So conflict is so part of the game. You talk about embarrassment. We want to avoid embarrassment. There's also something innate in us that wants to avoid conflict because we are conflict averse as a society. We want to be accepted by the pack. Loneliness, especially in young males, is crippling for them. So we want to avoid loneliness. We want to avoid conflict, but conflict's kind of what you need to embrace.
Yeah.
So what are some of your steps in ensuring that you don't take negotiation personally, you embrace the conflict in a positive, constructive, respectful way, even when maybe someone else is using it more of a combative way?
Yeah, it's hard. The personal side can be hard because I have had people call me names and get up and yell at me, and because the deadline is approaching and we've got to get this done, and they just expect me to cave on my position, and I'm saying I can't cave. It's not legitimate. That's not something that we're going to do. I breathe deeply. I use mindfulness a lot as a way of preparing for conflict, so that if something arises where I can feel myself starting to coil up, I will take a deep breath. And if I see the other side starting to get very emotional, I will put my hands open on the, if we're in the room, my hands on the table, and I will look at them. I will close my book or my laptop or whatever and make sure I'm looking at them and listening to them and respond in a calm voice. If somebody says something that I really, it kind of stings, I'm always of the, if you see something, say something rule. So I'll say, I'm a little surprised that you would use that word, if it's personal to me. Or they say, are you guys trying to rip us off? Sometimes that phrase gets thrown out there. You said it was this before, and now you're saying it's this. Now you're trying to rip us off. And I'll say, well, let's talk about that phrase for a second. Do you think we've been doing business together for 10 years because we try to rip you off? I mean, that's the furthest thing from our mind. When I think about all the programs, all the work we've done, all the ways that we've made you successful, I guess I'm just not sure where that's coming from. And then I'll ask for a break, because I don't want them to have to respond and lose face in that moment. I'll say, you know what, let me just take a break for a little bit with my team and kind of talk about where we are and some of the things you said, and let's get back together in 15 minutes. And that gives everybody a chance to cool down. But I don't want them to have to respond, with their hat in hand and say, you're right, I'm sorry, I shouldn't have said those things. They may come back and they have come back and apologized and said, I'm sorry, I got a little worked up. It's because blah, blah, blah. Oh, let's talk about that. Somebody said to me a long time ago, when somebody yells at you in a negotiation, that's data. You've hit something. Don't run away from that. Run toward it and find out what's going on there. What did I do or say? And that's how I'll respond. I'll say, that is not the response I expected. What did I do, or what did we say, or what's going on that caused you to react that way? Because I don't think anybody wants to be angry or upset here in the room, and try to break it down. Or I may say, when it was in person, can I just talk to you for a moment, and take them outside and figure out what's going on. So it really is in the moment. And I think that's a big difference between somebody who comes in and negotiates and somebody who is a negotiator. Is in those situations, they don't shut down, accommodate, and run away. Like if the client approaches you and says, as they're about to sign, you know what, we'd like to sign this thing, but we want a 10% discount. A lot of business people will say, oh, wow, we didn't expect that. Let me go away and see what I can do about that. That's running away from the problem. That's that. And they know they're going to get something now because you've left the room. So I tell people, you have to respond to that, if only to say, after you say, oh, wow, help me understand that. You've got to negotiate in the moment and challenge it there, because if you walk away from it, then you've given up. You've given up on it. And that's the challenge of the emotion. And that's why I say it's substance, process, emotion. You got to think about, and I want to know, who are the hotheads? Who might blow up on me? Now, sometimes that can be a good thing to know who's going to blow up on you, because sometimes you end up with difficult people. So many years ago, when I was with IBM and I was doing patent licensing deals, we went out to Silicon Valley, and there were all these startups that were creating stuff. This is, if you can believe it, pre-internet. This is like 1995. So people were just starting to develop the technology that was going to be used on the internet. And IBM was, licensing this stuff. So my boss and I go out, and we're meeting with the lawyer and the CEO of the company, and whoever else is part of their team, and it's just him and me. And their lawyer came out of his shoes at us with, you guys are doing this, and IBM's going to try and steal this, and they're going to do this, they're going to do that. Just really combative. And my boss did this. Just sat back like this. And then every once in a while he would say something, and the guy would blow up. And we'd go on. And then he'd say something again, very calmly, and the guy would blow up. He just kept doing this. And the CEO saw the deal slipping away, because the guy he had hired to negotiate it was impossible to work with. So the CEO said, can we just take a break for a little bit? And he left. And when he came back, he didn't come back with that lawyer. He had a different lawyer sitting there, somebody else who'd been second chair. And so we started up again, and the new lawyer comes up, my boss again. And first time, he leans forward and says, your boss tried doing it that way, and it didn't work out very well, did it? So what I learned, besides it being like a cool mic drop moment, that you get a few of these moments in negotiation, it was a lesson that when you have a difficult negotiator on the other side, you can never tell the other party that person's causing a problem. because they close ranks. You can never get somebody out on the other side. But what you can do is you can put a spotlight on the problem and let the client take care of it. So I had that situation. We had a large deal that I was doing back in like 2006. And in our industry, we have a group that's called TPAs, third-party advisors. They are negotiation consultants who come in and they help you out, and they specialize in technology deals. So there was a TPA, a guy named Rich, who I had done a deal with previously. So I always, like to show up, get to the conference room, look around, kind of get a sense of where everything is, how it's all laid out. And Rich is in there. And Rich is putting up tent cards with everybody's name on it on the conference table in preparation for the meeting that afternoon. And he looks over at me and he says, "Oh, Dieffenbach, you're here." And I said, "Hey, Rich, good to see you. Nice to be working with you again." He said, "Yeah." So he's putting up, and I look, and I don't see my name anywhere. I'm supposed to be, the center of the table, arguably across from him. And I said, "Rich, I don't see anything with my name on it." And he said, "Oh, you're over there." And he points to a chair next to the door. And he says, "And if you give me a hard time, the door will be in the hallway tomorrow." So I laughed. I picked up the card. I said, "Okay, Rich, I get it. And I put it down in the center of the table. So I ruined his party a little bit because he wanted to do this in the moment when everybody was in the room. And I'm sitting over here with my name card on a chair away from the table. So he continued to be challenging in that negotiation, questioning things, being difficult. And we had committed to get this deal done in 30 days. The clock was ticking. And the executive who was sitting next to him was like just jumping at everything. Like, we got it. No, let's move on. Let's go. So he chose to challenge us on something out of the blue. He says, "On this thing here, before you said it was going to be this, and now you're saying it's this. Like, what are you guys doing here? Why are you bait and switching here?" I said, "Well, Rich," I said, "this isn't a bait and switch." I said, "We said this before." Yeah, I said, "Here," and this is back when we had paper, pulled paper out of my bag and said, "Here's our proposal, blah, blah, blah." He's like, "Oh, okay, all right." So then the next day he does it again on something else. "Well, you said this before, you said this," and I realized, okay, this is a credibility game. This is him trying to push us back and make us look like we're dishonest and have us break down and make concessions, etc. "You do this way, you say this way." I said, "Rich," I said, that's not how it went." I said, "You know what? We have this information. Let me go away for a little bit, and we'll come back to you with it to just show you where, that we're telling the truth on this thing." So we leave for about 20 minutes. Go down to the cafeteria, get a cup of coffee. I had the answer in my bag. We come back up. I pull it back out. I show it to him. "Oh, okay, fine." Third day, does it again. Now I can see the executive is getting frustrated because he's like, "What is going on here? We got to get this deal done." I said, "Rich, let me come back to you. We have that information." We go downstairs to the cafeteria for 2 hours. We had lunch, we had coffee, talked about Monday Night Football, came back upstairs. The executive was ready to lose his mind. The next day, Rich was at the end of the table, and the executive was facing off with me. He was like, "I'm going to do this myself because I don't know what this guy's doing." So I couldn't say to him, "Your guy keeps challenging my credibility. He's trying to make me look like I'm dishonest." Instead, I had to show, don't tell.
Always.
Show them where the problem is. They'll take care of the problem for you. And that's what happened in that situation.
When you call people out like that, it really does put their back up, we feel. And in our opinion, there's no such thing as miscommunication.
Right.
And it's kind of a bullshit cop-out excuse,
Yeah.
but there are misinterpretations.
Yes.
And we feel the best communicators in the world are the ones that can understand when intent and interpretation are equal.
Mm-hmm.
That's when we feel effective communication happens.
Right.
My intent lands in a way that you interpret fully. Your intent lands in a way that I interpret fully. Like, that's the gold standard version of what communication truly is.
Yes.
And one of the things that we talk about sometimes in order to disarm a room or kind of start off on the right foot is having a contracting conversation where we say, hey, our intent is to ensure we find the most beneficial deal possible that, of course, protects our interests and explores our interests while also meets your interests within the agreement. So if at any point in time it feels like we haven't understood what your interests are, I encourage you, just let me know right away. I don't want things to fester. And I also promise that if it feels like you haven't heard or understood any of our interests, I'm going to let you know right away so things don't fester. And hopefully that does a few things for us. One, I'm not here to be secretive. I'm not here to be manipulative. I'm here to get a good deal that works with both of us.
Right.
You have free reign to call me out anytime you want. But I'm going to do it to you too.
Yeah.
And I feel like sometimes we need to level set a room that gets just a little bit too hot.
Yeah. Right.
In a way that lets them know we're here to do business in a credible, respectful, professional way. This is how we can do that together. And I feel like a lot of people don't really understand what effective communication truly is.
Oh, yeah.
And how you can really bring some of those tenets to the table too.
One of the lines that I will try to land with a client when I can, and genuinely, it's not a tactic, but a genuine opportunity, is to ask, what do you think my primary interest is in this engagement?
I like that.
Most of the time the answer is, make money, make a profit, something like that. And I'll say that's a waterfall part of it. My primary goal is to make you successful. Because if I make you successful and you achieve the metrics that you have for this engagement, I will make money. But I'll also have a reference. I'll have a happy client. I'll have a great place for my people to come and do creative things, and they'll grow and the company will grow. Everything I want from this engagement hinges on me making you successful here. And obviously, I need certain things in order to do that. I need resources. I need the right people, etc. And so that's what we're going to work out, is what is that path to you being successful, me being successful as a result of that. And that usually resonates well because clients don't often think about the fact that companies like ours, we really love solving their problems. We really love coming in and creating new stuff and making business more efficient, and our clients talking about us to other clients and things. So that's my that communication line that I think can often set the table for how we're going to work together. And it's pretty, it's expressing a little bit of vulnerability, transparency, and so forth in saying that.
We talk about, you have your framework of 3. We have our relationship process goals, almost the exact same thing, different words. Relationships is your ability to get creative and collaborative. Without a relationship, you'll bargain with someone. You might do some light trading with someone on a professional B2B type level, but you're not going to break into that kind of classic win-win type environment unless you have a relationship in which they trust you enough to do that.
Yeah.
And all of these concepts of, never give anything away for free, it's nonsensical to a degree, because you just said you can do something for free for them because you're getting relationship equity, or you're getting access, or you're getting market share or opportunity, or that next pitch that's now available to you because you gave away something that was low cost that they genuinely appreciated. But that goes to a big topic that a lot of people talk about in negotiation, which is leverage. So leverage is one of the most talked about aspects of negotiation, but very, very hard for most people to define what leverage truly is. So what are your philosophies on what leverage is, how to find it, how to use it?
My philosophy is the strongest person at the table is the one who cares least about the deal, because that person can get up and go somewhere else. And so to keep them at the table, you have to put more stuff on the table. You have to add more options, or else. And so I had a deal years ago with an automotive company where they brought us all into a ballroom, and they had the top 10 technology services companies in the United States all in this ballroom, 3 of us at each table. I looked around the room, I could see all of our competitors there. And basically it was a great strategy to say, ladies and gentlemen, here's my BATNA. Here are all my alternatives. There's 10 of you I can do business with. So if you take that image of being in a ballroom with a bunch of tables and they can go from one to the other, that gives you that sense of what is leverage about. It's about either having something better on your table than what anybody else has on their table, that they're going to stay here, or somehow shaping their perception that what everybody else has is not as good as what you have here. So in other words, I'm not adding to the table. The table is still the same, but now I'm changing the conversation to say, well, you could do that, but here's what might happen there, or, something like that. I mean, I never ever say anything negative about anybody else in the business, because it just creates negative energy in it. But you can say, well, this is what we're doing, and this is where we've been successful in the industry, and we're the leading ones in this. And suddenly they're saying, they're the leading ones, and the other guys aren't the leading ones. So it's a combination of understanding what else I can do, what's my BATNA. If I walk away from the table, where am I going to go? And for service providers, that's often very difficult, right? Because I've got this deal, and we do big deals. And so there's not like another big deal sitting in the wings that if I don't do this, I do that. And they are exclusive to each other. They're all additive. I want to do as many big deals as I possibly can. So we often, in the technology services industry, we don't have that BATNA that we're looking at. Instead, what we're looking at is how strong is the other side's BATNA? How likely are they to walk away from it? And it's very situational. If you are competing, for example, for work where there's an incumbent, that's a very hard deal to win, because the client's BATNA is, I don't have to do anything. Got great leverage here. I don't actually have to make a change, but I put this out to bid to see what could happen. So now you need to know what's going on, how the service has been. Are they unhappy? Are they looking to change? Or is this purely a price expedition to sort of see what the outcome could be? And the studies show that in order to get a party to change from an incumbent, you have to articulate value equal to 2.5 times of what's happening there.
Wow.
However you quantify that. But you have to have a value proposition that says, with your current provider, they're charging you this and you're getting that. And you're missing all these things. With us, you'll get this, plus inroads to our new thing here, and this and this and this. And they go, wow, that's a lot. Because again, it's risk aversion. The other side is saying, what's going to happen if I switch here? Am I going to get fired because I went from the incumbent to these people and they fail? So it's back to that thing. It's not the best provider. It's the one who's least likely to fail. What's my safest decision? Saying no to anything else. No is the safest word in the English language. It means no change. We're staying exactly where we are. So I can say no. So in that case, there's a tremendous amount of leverage there. And so the only way the client has the leverage there, the only way to change that dynamic is to almost create FOMO for them. That like, if you don't do the deal with me, you're missing out.
Yeah.
Because everybody's buying my stuff now, and it's really cool, and they're being very successful with it.
For the audience, BATNA, best alternative to a negotiated agreement, kind of classic negotiation acronym out there.
Right.
Sometimes I feel like BATNA, although an incredibly important concept, ends up being a bit of a catch-all. And we had this discussion actually internally just this week within our team of how do we at Aligned want to talk about alternatives as a concept, because your BATNA is the best alternative you have. And you also can throw in there a WATNA, the worst alternative you have, right? That one sounds a bit funny though. But then you have all of these other options in between. And I may have strong alternatives, weak alternatives, or no alternatives. They may have strong alternatives, weak alternatives, or no alternatives. There's a lot of gray in between. I don't feel like people map their alternatives well enough, not just for themselves, but for their counterparty. Do you have a framework or maybe a mental model or an example or two of what it's like to actually look into all of your different alternatives, and how would you assess how attractive they are?
Yeah, it's a great question. It's all part of prep. You know, I have been trying to advocate for the simplest negotiation preparation process one can have so that people will actually do it.
Hear, hear.
Right? Take a piece of paper, take a pencil, 7 words: interest, options, communication, commitment, legitimacy, relationship, BATNA. Put them on a piece of paper. Now look at them and say, where am I with each of these things? So I do that. And I look at BATNA and I say, okay, what's the BATNA situation here? What is ours? What would be preferable, to do a deal that's a bad deal because we want the qualification, because we want this, we want that? Does that outweigh the fact that it's not the deal that we wanted to get? Is there somebody else we could go to? So I do qualify those things and try to figure out, if this doesn't work out, what happens next. More often than not, it really is more a question of, what are they going to do? Where else can they go? And how credibly can they? Are they on, what we call a burning platform, that they have technology that's going to time out and they've got to get off and they've got to go do something else. And so they can't really delay this anymore, despite the fact that they're saying, we're going to delay, maybe we'll go to your competition, and see what they're doing. I'm thinking to myself, you don't have time. You can't go to the competition. Your technology they're not supporting it after June. And it's now November, and we need to build your platform and get you ready to transition over. And so, all of that, it really requires knowing what's happening on the other side of the table to be able to say, is this real or is this not real? And it's not nefarious. It's not being bad to know where their weaknesses are. It's actually helping them to say, don't waste time on this. Okay, I'm here to make you successful, my primary goal. If we're going to play around with silly terms and positional behavior, the clock's going to run out. And the voice of the deal is going to come in the room and they're going to kick your butt because you didn't get the deal done. So let's get rocking here. So I try to create that sense of, isn't the goal to get done and get you guys moving and keep the business running versus you testing me on everything that we're doing? And I never will rattle my BATNA or call out the other party's weak BATNA and say, you've got nowhere else to go.
You can play that card one time.
Yeah.
You got one time on that card.
One time to play it, and then it's like they know. But here's the thing. They will find a way around it too. They absolutely will find it. I mean, if it's the board expects us to do blah, 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 and you're like, okay, well, the board's going to vote on this in June. And you know what? We'll go to the board and tell them it's been delayed 3 months. Bam. BATNA re-strengthened, so you can't play games with that. But it really is about saying, look, I'm trying to help you. This is not a fight. We're not competing. I brought all these people in here to help make you successful. Can we work together here and do that? And I'll help you and we'll get you, So that's where the leverage then becomes further to your point around communication, starting to say, okay, how am I going to change their perception that they think they're in a position of strength here and they can call the shots and make them aware, listen, I'm not going to put your back up against the wall, but you're not calling the shots here. You need to get this deal done, and you need to get this deal done more than I do. So let's work together. How am I going to communicate that to them? And it might be something, that conversation that has to be had with the voice of the deal, that you go upstairs and have whoever has that relationship and say, you need to talk to them about things are getting stalled down here and we may miss deadlines. Because the person who's sitting at the table may not be subject to that deadline. That might not be something that's part of how they're measured or their interests. Again, the multi-headed beast. So you've got to know what's going to motivate people to do the things you need to do. And that may not be a motivating thing for them. And so somehow you got to get them into the boat.
Totally. Building coalitions, understanding their alternatives, how attractive they are, our alternatives, how attractive they are.
Yeah.
That gives you an element of leverage. When it comes to our golden rule as it relates to negotiation, we feel the best negotiators in the world are clear in their expectations. They can deliver those expectations assertively and with respect.
Mm-hmm.
Finding the line of relationships, processes, and goals delivered in clear, assertive, and respectful ways.
Mm-hmm.
Do you have a golden rule as it relates to negotiation that you feel everyone in the world can learn from?
I think the one thing I'm always mindful of is never introduce negative energy, because that is so hard to eradicate, and it spiders through things. If something happens and it can be like a joke. Somebody can make a joke about somebody, and I had this happen one time. We were coming back in the morning, and I was walking in with one of my colleagues, and the lead negotiator for the client, they had a big bowl of M&Ms on the table, and it was 9:30 in the morning. And he grabbed a handful of M&Ms as we were coming in, and he threw them in his mouth. And my colleague said, "Whoa, that's a heck of a breakfast, huh?" And he shot a look at him like, "I will kill you for that." I was like, oh my gosh, why did you say that? Why did you make a joke that takes him down? I mean, it's one thing if you say something that's positive, but a negative joke. And it just compounded after that. I mean, he wouldn't even talk to this guy anymore because he was so mad about it. I was like, God, no, you can't do that. So my golden rule is you've got to keep it positive. You've got to keep it collaborative. You've got to keep it honest, with each other. I mean, integrity, I say integrity is the pillow on which your conscience sleeps. If you cannot act with integrity, you're always going to be second guessing yourself. And so any deal that I go into, anything that I'm doing, I had a situation with a client gave us a spreadsheet, and there was a part of the spreadsheet online. It was an Excel document that was blacked out. And one of the people on my team was a crypto expert, and he spent the next hour figuring out how to undo that blackout. And he did. And he comes to me so proud of himself. Look, I undid it. This is what's under it. I said, oh, why did you do that? I have to go and tell them now that we did that. Because if they find out, if that information, I mean, that just completely destroys our integrity. Don't do stuff like that. So I went and told them. They said it was fine. They're like, oh, actually, we meant to unblock that for you when we sent it to you. So it was okay. But, I gained some ground there. Similarly, we had and this is one of those things where, as I said, I like to have fun sometimes in a negotiation. So we had a negotiation, classic, we're down one side of the table, client's down the other side of the table. And there was a disagreement between the two lawyers. And I was there as the, business lead for it. And they're going back and forth on a point. And it's not an important point. It was a small thing, but for some reason they really dug in their heels. And I thought, I'm going to try something. I'll have some fun here. So I got up and I walked around the table. And I sat down next to their lawyer. And they looked at me like I had just broken the fourth wall. Like I'd walked off a movie screen or something. Like, what are you doing over here? You don't belong over here. So they finally stopped talking, and then everybody's looking at me. And I looked at my lawyer and I said, I'm sitting over here because I agree with him. And everybody kind of laughed about it. And it was a little bit throwing him under the bus, but it was a minor point. And I explained to him later, my intent was not to make you look bad. My intent was to let them know that my integrity is such that if they have the right answer, I'm going to agree with them. I'm not going to fight with them over stuff just to fight with them. I can be persuaded. And so that was the effort to do that. But I've always liked to just sort of try things out and see what happens. Fisher and Ury talk about the one-page strategy. You put everything down on one page and sit down and get everybody to focus on it. Focuses the energy. Now, what we used to do is we used to use the whiteboard. You had everybody in the conference room. You put something up on the whiteboard. Unfortunately, you can't do it anymore in video. But I wanted to test it and see how real it was. So we were having a conversation about a project. We were talking about the timeline. And I thought, I wonder what happens if I just draw something on the whiteboard. What does everybody do? So I went up to the whiteboard and I said, so the timeline is, and I just took a blue marker and I drew it like that. And I said a few more things and I sat down. When I drew the line, everybody turned their body like this to look up at the whiteboard. And for the rest of the session, everything we talked about, people kept pointing at a blue line. I mean, that blue line had so much meaning. It was the entire deal for the next 5 years, all encapsulated in a blue line of ink. But what happened was I took all the energy from here in between us and I moved it up there, and it turned it from what are we doing here? What do you want? What do I want? To here's a problem we need to solve. And that was using Fisher and Ury's concept of, put a piece of paper down and get two people around it and work on a one text concept and see if you can come up with it, working on it together. And it really worked. It changed the whole energy in the room. It was so cool to see it.
It's an incredibly wise thing to say, and it does align, pun intended, with what we talk about. The definition we go with negotiation is about managing conflict in a positive and constructive way to align on terms between all parties.
Yes.
John, thank you so much for getting aligned with us. I think the content's going to be phenomenal for our audience, and
Great.
Thanks for all the stories.
Thank you. Thanks, Mark. It was a pleasure.